It's Friday afternoon. That means it's time to talk Oklahoma football with all of you here at the Voice of College Football. So we invite you in, of course, over the next hour to take part in our conversation with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. So again, it's every Friday afternoon, a little bit early this time. So I hope you caught the notification, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central Time, typically at 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me on. I'm a little, I don't know about you, but I've got some realignment fatigue, so I'm really kind of excited to talk about the actual season in itself. So good to be with you again.
I did a call-in show the other night, and I said basically that I was suffering from realignment burnout. Yes, I said the same thing, but I said, of course, you guys ask whatever you need to. I know that this is important. And then, of course, over the next several minutes, a number of people felt guilty or were hesitant to ask me realignment questions. And I said, well, wait a minute, just letting you know, we can talk about anything. This is the big topic. So we will cut loose on the realignment talk if you have specific questions. But just being honest about, I can only figure out so many scenarios, and 90% of them we know will not come true, and even 90% of them plus aren't even feasible.
Yeah.
So if anybody has realignment questions, you are welcome to throw them in there, and your comments as well. But we are going to focus on Oklahoma football with the season just about 4 weeks away. All right, Jason. And in particular, this day is the first day of fall camp. So we'll all keep that in mind. Of course, nothing to report as of now. And it's typically a good thing when there's nothing to report. We want everyone to stay healthy first and foremost. Jason, as we run down some talking points concerning the Sooners for the next month as they prepare for 2021, let's start with, even though it's considered across the board the best team in the Big 12, arguably the best team in the nation, and maybe has the best odds, I would think, in some circles as reaching the playoff to be the biggest certainty across the country, combining their ability with the conference. There's still some possible concerns out there concerning certain units, certain situations on both sides of the ball or all three phases. So what would those be for you?
Yeah, so for me, Mark, I think all eyes seem to be on the offensive line. I think that's the consensus among, anyone that you talk to, fans, media, insiders alike, that maybe not necessarily a concern, but in terms of when you look at the totality of the team from a specific unit, the offensive line might be there, specifically depth, maybe more at the tackle position. And I know we'll get into some of the specifics around that, but looking at the center position, I think it's been a long time since Oklahoma hasn't been really solidified on who that guy is going to be coming into the fall camp. So that position battle is going to be interesting. There's some depth concerns at the tackle position, just in terms of some guys that have left the program, some guys that haven't materialized as much as you would like. So I think throughout the 3-4 weeks here of camp, I think the big question is, how does that group come together for this team? Running back is another, staying on the offensive side of the ball, running back is another area of concern, specifically from the depth perspective. I think we've talked a little bit about the Marcus Major situation here last week. It's not really been cleared up. Riley didn't talk about it at all yesterday in his comments in terms of the opening part of the press conference. So I think it's, from everything that I've heard, and I think we're lumping in Wanye Morris into that situation from an academic perspective. I think the bigger concern is Marcus Major. From everything that I've heard, Wanye Morris it was a little bit overblown. Don't really expect that to be, a big impact from him. So not to say that he's completely out of the woods, but I don't think that's as big of an issue. The Marcus Major thing I hear is more and more of a concern. It might be something that the team has to deal with, and it might not be solidified up until maybe the first part of the season, so first game. So I think that's something that's maybe more of a concern that in terms of what I've been hearing lately. I think I think there was some discussion. That's what brings Trey Bradford as being a much more important part of this running back unit. So I think those are some areas of concern. And I'm going from probably my perspective from most to least. If we're wanting to kind of talk about concerns as far as that goes, so tight end, H back, I think that's when you look at that, they got three guys that could be that'll be good players for them. You got Jeremiah Hall, you got Austin Stogner, and then you got Braden Willis as your three guys. Now, if one of those go down, then your depth might be, a little bit of concern. However, I think those three guys are pretty solid. Austin Stogner has come in really healthy. They said that he's back to where he was at the beginning of last year, which is certainly good. And then I think lastly on the defensive side, it's kind of funny, Mark. We've talked about this a lot, and it seems from the fans, the media, and just kind of people that I've talked to, there's much less concern on the defensive side of the ball at any position. Depth is better than it's been in 10, 15 years. I think the quality depth is there. Maybe if anything, I would look at the safety position. Maybe not, Mark, necessarily in terms of quality depth that they have, just in terms of a problem that they're starting to have. And I think Grinch talked about this a little bit yesterday is, there's the challenge of getting these guys more reps in practice, because there was a time where Pat Fields and Delarian Turner-Yell were the guys at safety, and they didn't feel comfortable bringing those kids off the field because the depth behind them and the quality there wasn't quite what it should be or what they would expect it to be. It's not the same now. So I think the challenge is getting a lot of those kids reps and just looking at what that looks like and keeping people happy more than anything else.
Boomer Sooner, we're talking up Oklahoma with everyone here. And of course, Jason Ray makes it all happen here. So without Jason, we don't have an Oklahoma show. So keep that in mind. Appreciate Jason being here for now 14 shows with all of you. And Friday afternoon, we hope you'll be able to reserve your time to talk Oklahoma football live. But keep in mind that if you can't make it, of course, you rewatch it when it's posted. Catch Jason's work at Last Word on College Football. Last Word on College Football. If you follow me on a regular basis, you see that they have provided tremendous support through the years. Jason, Kevin, Tony, on down the line. No question about that. We had Travis Kenobi on just the other day to talk West Virginia. We'll be posting that video here soon. All right. Remington Walls asking, hey, Mark, Jason, what are your predictions for OU in the postseason? By the way, appreciate you guys always producing great content. Thank you so much for that, Remington. Have you made season predictions? And I don't even know what your ritual is, Jason, in regards to predictions.
No, I haven't as of yet. We'll probably do that specifically on Last Word, and then certainly here we can of the Big 12 and just overall. So I'm not there yet. I'd like to, kind of get a little bit of idea as the team gets in the fall camp on what that looks like. So, from a prediction perspective, I think we can look at we can look at the hype surrounding this team. I think is interesting to view. When you look at, I think the AP poll probably comes out next week at some point. I think it's almost assuredly Oklahoma at worst is probably going to be 3. I know ESPN ranked them in their preseason number 2, so I think you're probably at number 2 or number 3 for Oklahoma. And when you look at this team from a totality perspective, I think this is the best. I think coming into the season, I think this is the best total team that they've had probably since. Did a little bit of research yesterday, Mark, just kind of looking back on offense and defense. Probably 2004 is the last time I think this team this Oklahoma team had as much talent and as much coming back and depth as they had. And 2004 was obviously Oklahoma fans will remember, was a terrible ending. But that team had a really good defense for the most part during the year. They gave up the 55 to USC in the championship game, but other than that, they only gave up 17 points per game on average throughout the year, including that game. So if you look at that, Mark, if Oklahoma's in a position where we're ending the season and their defense has only given up 17 points per game, I think it's probably a pretty happy ending for most Oklahoma fans, given where their offense is. But having said that, they've had 3 seasons coming into the season where they've been in the top 3 preseason, and really, Mark, none of those 3 seasons have turned out well. One of them was an 8-5 season, one of them was a 10-3 season, and I think another one was a 10-2 season. So it's a little bit of a championship or bust mentality. And when I say bust, it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody's going to get fired or anything like that. I think it's just a bust in terms of the anticipation and what these kids are putting in the coaches and the team is putting on themselves. So it gets down to matchups when you get to the playoff time. But I think certainly Oklahoma is in position to have a much better postseason than they've had in the past.
I posted a video a few months ago where I looked at the last 50 years of AP polls, and I matched up the preseason poll with the postseason poll to see how accurate they are. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it was generally there was no difference between being ranked number 1 and number 2 preseason in regards to your likelihood of winning the national championship. Those were almost identical. Maybe even the number 2 team had 1 or 2 more national championships. So basically identical between 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then I looked at a top 5. I looked at the top 10, and then of course those outliers. And it shouldn't surprise anyone that in terms of the elite, now in terms of predicting 10 through 20, I didn't 10 through 25 looking at that. But in terms of projecting who's going to win the whole thing or who's going to be in the playoff, and looking at that top 4 to 5, shouldn't surprise anyone that the AP poll has been much more accurate recently. Again, at the top, I don't know if that means there are better predictions. I just think it's more predictable. Because I don't know that the rest of the poll was as accurate as you would think it would be. So it's just very much at the top between the 5 schools that we talk about all the time, finishing pretty much in the top 5 over the last 6-7 years. I know the last time that a team outside the top 10 preseason won the national championship was Florida State in 2013. They started at number 11, and the last team that was well down the poll was Auburn and Cam Newton in 2010. They started number 22 that year, and it's been since the late 80s, and I can't remember the team exactly that won a national championship preseason unranked. I'm not coming up with that team, but regardless, So those are just some nuggets concerning preseason polls and how accurate they could be. So my predictions are right there. So again, I say this constantly, and I got to get back into it because time is running out and the clock is ticking. So I have posted about 6 prediction videos. I will be running through the entire Power 5. So I've got Oklahoma right here, but I'm not going to tell you what I've predicted them to be because I'm releasing a video, and then we'll do at the end the conference championship games and the playoffs. And I don't know how accurate I was specifically team to team, but I will brag about Alabama, Ohio State being my national championship game last year because I can brag about that for a few more weeks.
There you go. Well, and I think one of the things that I was looking at, and I've got the specific numbers in front of me here. So for Oklahoma, they've been ranked preseason 3rd or higher in 3 of the last 15 years. So not a lot of data points there, but when you look 2009, they were preseason ranked number 3. They finished 8-5. That was the year. You give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that year. That was the year that Sam Bradford got hurt twice early on, and then Landry Jones as a freshman has to come in. So you give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt there. But
was that the BYU opener?
Yes, it
that
was
season. Yep.
And then 2011, they were actually preseason number 1, and they finished 10-3 that year as well. They finished ranked number 16th in the country from a preseason number 1. So that was actually the season that Oklahoma State won the Big 12. So they not only did Oklahoma not even play for a national championship, being preseason number 1, they didn't even win the Big 12. One of the few years in the last few years that they haven't won the Big 12. And then recently, as 2016, Oklahoma was preseason 3. They finished 11-2 and finished number 7. So that was the year that Oklahoma lost 2 of their first 3. They lost to Houston in the beginning of the season opener, and then a couple of weeks later they lost to Ohio State at home, and that was in Bradford's, I think, his second year. But that team finished well. In terms of they won 10 games to end the season. It's the team that beat Auburn in the Sugar Bowl, and it was a kind of a catalyst towards that playoff year the next year. So I think there's a lot of similarities that Oklahoma takes from 2019 into 2020, from 2016 into 2017. So, if that materializes on the field, who knows? But that was a very comparable season from that season to last year. What in terms of what Oklahoma will hopefully bring to the table this year.
Got a couple more questions here, but they basically cover territory that Jason has already reviewed. So if you've got anything else on this, again, Jason, if you missed, for those people watching, if you missed any thing to date, obviously watch the video after it posts. But Hicks 1968, who do you think will be the starting center for OU? And then rumors surrounding Marcus Major and Wanye Morris. So you, to a certain extent, addressed all of that. Anything else there?
From a center position, I think it's, we talked about, we didn't talk really about from a prediction perspective or in depth about that. I think from what Riley said yesterday, there's 4 guys that he would anticipate being guys that are battling for that starting position. Obviously you have Andrew Raymond, Chris Murray, who spent a bulk of the time in the spring. Ian MacGyver is a kid that was a backup to Creed Humphrey. Robert Conjal is a new guy that came in. So those 4 guys will probably be in the mix. I think legitimately you got 2 guys. You got Andrew Raymond, you got Chris Murray. I think that in each one of them has certain skill sets that they've kind of brought to the table in the spring, and I think it'll be interesting to see which one sets themselves apart. For Chris Murray, I think the physical side of it, he's there. He's got the strength from the point of attack. I think what he was struggling with a little bit in the spring this past season was picking up the mental side of it, doing everything that Coach Biedenbow asks them to do in terms of, picking up blitzes, calling out, and just being the leader of that offensive line. So then when you look at Andrew Raym, it was sort of the opposite for him. He's very intelligent just in terms of being able to, understand exactly what they're trying to do, where the coverage is at, where they're being blitzed at, if they need to, to shift the protection to one side or the other, who's picking up who. I mean, he's good there. I think where he needed to get better in the summer was from a strength perspective. I've heard some good things about Raym in terms of what he did in the weight room over the summer. So if I'm sitting here on August 6th, projecting who's going to start at center on September 4th, I think Raym will probably be the guy that ends up getting the nod, but I think it'll still be a healthy competition throughout the bulk of fall camp. I mean, I think in a perfect world, you'd like to be solidified and with that guy a couple weeks in the camp. That way, he can get more and more of those first team reps. But I think it'll be a competition at least for the first couple of weeks.
Mike, I love your dream scenario there, and I'm actually going to add to it a little bit. So, and maybe this is what you had in mind. Mike says, Sooners dream year, win the Natty, carry that trophy to the SEC, start the SEC schedule next season. As Jason and I have discussed, technically right now from a legal standpoint, OU and Texas tied to the Big 12 until the 25-26 sports calendar year. But of course, that is not going to be a good situation for anybody involved. So we would expect that to be moved up considerably, whether it's moved up all the way to 22. But I will add win the Natty and beat an SEC team in the national championship game. And you may have to beat two of them on the way to the national. That's possible. It's not probable, but it's possible.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think Mike's completely right. I think that's the dream season that Oklahoma fans would love to see, right? I mean, you do that, and then you kind of carry that momentum into the schedule next year, if it happens next year. I think 2023 at the latest, and possibly next year. But yeah, I think that would be, I mean, obviously a great story coming into the SEC if that were to happen, for sure.
Yeah, the players and the coaches, they want to win the Big 12 championship, then win the national championship, regardless of who they have to play. That's their, and some of them will be honest at times, not talking about this particular team or coaching staff, but sometimes athletes and coaches, most of the time will just give you the flat out, we just want to win the championship. We don't care who we play. Sometimes something will come out once in a while. You'll hear from somebody in some particular sport and they'll admit, yeah, we really wanted to see them.
Yeah.
In this situation, again, I can't speak for any of the Oklahoma players or Lincoln Riley, but in terms of what Jason and I do in regards to writing articles and talking about this, it would be funny. And I've got no stake in the game. I really don't care. I just want to see good football. It would be funny to see Oklahoma beat an SEC championship, an SEC team to win the national championship. And then if their entry into the SEC, especially if they were able to play an SEC schedule next season, because then all this talk from the SEC fans, which I'm not completely discounting it. It's just, it would be a funny scenario because all of this about you're going to come to the SEC and be 8-4 would pretty much silence most of that, at least.
Oh, yeah, it really would. It would be such an intriguing storyline going into the season, for sure.
All right. Got Jason Ray here talking Oklahoma football. We appreciate all of you being here to talk Sooners as they hit the practice field for the first time here on Friday. And typically 3 or 4 days in, they put the pads on and start to hit a little bit. All right, we will knock down Jason's other topics for today. We talked about biggest concerns, talent depth, position battles to watch. Is that where we were, or did you answer that? I've lost track already.
Oh, you're good. No, I think we've talked about one of them. So I've got 6 overall position battles that I think are things that I'm looking at that are very intriguing within fall camp. I've got 3 on the offensive side and 3 on the defensive side. And Mark, to your point, we just talked about the center position with Andrew Raymond, Chris Murray. And so next, going to the running back room situation, I think it's going to be the Eric Gray versus Kennedy Brooks battle is going to be interesting. I think, Kennedy Brooks was a little bit slower just in terms of from a rust perspective. Heard he's had a pretty good summer. I think DeMarco Murray has challenged him maybe in a different way than he's been challenged in the past. And how Cavontre Bradford kind of rolls into that, it's a different story. I mean, I think the thing that's very intriguing about Bradford is I think he brings a certain element to that running back room that they don't have. He's a speed burner. He is DeMarco Murray on his Instagram posted a photo of all of them at their house, doing a little in the summer, and he looks quicker. He looks much more stronger than the rest of the running backs in there. So he just looks a little bit different now. Whether he's able to that's to materialize on the field early on in the season remains to be seen. But he's a guy that looks the part. So really, it's kind of almost where do those 3 guys end in the pecking order, and how does that Marcus Major enter into that as that kind of unfolds throughout the fall. Wide receiver is another position, specifically when you talk about Theo Weiss. Played a lot last year. It's not quite lived up to the 5-star hype yet, but he played much better. Was more consistent. Was a bigger factor. Was tied with Marvin Mims in terms of receptions for the year. So how his battle with Mike Woods on that side, he's coming off an injury. Mike Woods is a little bit more battle tested, certainly not at Oklahoma, but through what he's done at Arkansas. So those are the three, real big position battles that I'm looking at on the offensive side of the ball. Defense, I think one of the things that was, we've said this, but to hear Alex Grinch say this, and this is not really a specific topic, but just thinking about this, he'd mentioned that he believes Oklahoma has about 14 guys on the defensive line that will be able to rotate in, 8 interior guys and 6 on the edge. So I think, certainly that could change. You could trim that down a little bit, but I think that's a group that is really, really strong, and I think certainly the best unit on the team. So there's not a lot of position battle questions there, but I think when you go to the linebacker position, David Agwebu and Deshaun White, those are, they kind of split time last year. Agwebu's a guy that's, he changed positions last year. He kind of accepted that in stride and played really well, especially over the last part of the year. But he's a guy that his athleticism is off the chart, so it's time for him to, kind of put it to work, on the field. When you look at the safety position, Pat Fields, versus Key Lawrence. Key Lawrence is a guy that came over from Tennessee, a big transfer. Athleticism is there. I think his challenge is really kind of bringing it every single day, being very, very strong from a consistency perspective. So Pat Fields is a multi-year starter. He's a guy that is trusted by Grinch. He's a guy that has played a lot. He was a team captain, so I know it's a big. If Key Lawrence is the guy, he's a big. He's going to be a big part of what Oklahoma is doing this year. And then so at the nickel position, I think it's one of the most intriguing positions for me because Brendan Radley-Hiles played a lot the last couple of years. He's at Washington now, very much maligned kid in terms of what he did on the field, in terms of the extracurricular stuff that he got involved with that was very costly. He was, but he was a guy that was in position, but he wasn't really a game changer. And one of the things that you look at that nickel position is somebody who's a game changer because Grinch asked that position to do a lot. Sometimes they'll cover a tight end, sometimes they'll be at the line of scrimmage blitzing, sometimes they'll be covering a wide out. So I think Jeremiah Cradell is probably the leader in the clubhouse in terms of, what he was able to do in the spring. I think, many people that look at him, it looks, because he didn't play in the spring game, so it didn't get a look at him in that spring game. So it's a little bit of a unfinished product, I think, from that perspective. But I think another kid that will certainly factor into that is Billy Bowman. And then, Justin Harrington is a guy that they've talked about at cornerback. It'll be interesting to see, where he lands because Alex Grinch had talked about him in the same breath as a Trey Norwood, the way he did last year. And Trey Norwood came off of an ACL injury the year before, came back and was strong and could play a lot of different positions in the secondary. And I think Grinch kind of compared him. So if Harrington can give Oklahoma the kind of production that Trey Norwood gave, specifically in the latter half of the season last year, I think that's going to be a big benefit for the secondary this year.
All right. We also have on Jason's list on what to look out for this fall as you track Oklahoma football would be 5 freshmen to watch in regards to immediate impact on a team that's going to make a run for the Big 12 and beyond.
Yeah, so I'll start with the defense and talk about a guy that we just talked about. There was a question to Alex Grinch in the press conference yesterday who asked some of the freshmen on the defensive side that might get some work in and might be a big part of what they're doing. And it wasn't Mark. It was very quick. He didn't have to think about it. 2 seconds in, Billy Bowman was the first guy that he talked about. So he's a guy that started in the spring game, played a lot, was matched up with Marvin Mims and held his own, held him to 3 catches. So, played really well in that. And I think Grinch was, I think he was trying to temper his enthusiasm for him, but he talked about he's really never seen a guy come in quickly, and play as well as he did in the spring. And not only that, but, kind of take to the weight program. Sometimes it takes freshmen a couple of years just to be as committed as they need to be in the weight room. And he was, really kind of gushed about his ability. So I think whether or not he starts at nickel, I think he'll play a lot. I think you'll see him in the return game a little bit as well, maybe kickoff and punts. But I think you'll see him a lot. So I think that's the name, one of the biggest names on defense. Another guy that I've heard a lot about, wasn't here in the spring, linebacker Denny Stutzman is a guy that Grinch and anyone that I've talked to, anybody that I've heard, he's a guy that they talk about is a guy that's going to be in the mix in the linebacker room. He's, even not coming in the spring, he's a guy that is just a monster in the weight room. I said that Grinch had talked about him, just coming in, he threw up 225 pounds 20 times, and something as a new guy coming in, that was impressive. He's a gym rat. He's an incredible workhorse from what I've heard. So I think he'll be a guy that'll be in the mix. Not sure if he'll, be good enough to, or be able to unseat some of those guys that they have there at the linebacker position, specifically the depth that Oklahoma has there. But he's a guy that you can keep your eye on. And then moving to the offensive side of the ball, Caleb Williams is a guy, I know that he's the backup quarterback and he's very clearly the number 2 guy, but don't be surprised if Oklahoma, certainly getting him in some mop-up duty for the year, but wouldn't be surprised to see him, put him in some situations. Spencer Rattler's not he's not as mobile as a Kyler Murray, and maybe not even as much of a Baker Mayfield, but Caleb Williams is that guy. He is very clearly a dual threat. Wouldn't be surprised to see him put in some packages, especially in some big games, to just kind of get him on the field a little bit. Mario Williams is another guy who, from a freshman perspective, has had an excellent summer. Came in in the spring and played well. Had 3 or 4 catches in the spring game. Look for him to make a move in that wide receiver room, because I think one of the things, Oklahoma just needs a few guys. They've got a lot of talent there, but they've got to have a few guys that come out and be dependable targets. This next year. I mean, the one guy that is a given is Marvin Mims, but the other guys are a little bit unproven. So if Mario Williams is able to do that and be that guy, I think that'll be big for Oklahoma. And there's one additional guy that I had forgot to mention on the defensive side is Kelvin Gilliam on the defensive line is a guy that came in late. I've heard a lot of really good things about him in terms of the summer. He said in terms of what he's done, in terms of that summer program and just being ready. He's physically ready to play immediately. So I think it's one of those things, if he's good enough as from a talent, he's catching on to what Colin Thibodeau is teaching from the defensive line perspective. And another bonus guy that I'll throw in here, not sure, I've started to hear some rumblings about him. Not sure where he'll be able to be in terms of playing time, but Savion Byrd is another kid that came in here in the summer, who's went through the summer conditioning program, but is a guy he's very, very strong. I think they feel like his strength is a big, not sure where the footwork looks, but I think that's another guy to keep in mind, specifically if Oklahoma finds themselves in some depth injury issues on the offensive line at some point this year.
Listen up, folks. We are just a few weeks away from Oklahoma football. Week 1 coming up September 4th, and following each game, we will have post-game right here at the Voice of College Football, Oklahoma. So we will be giving you details as it rolls out in regards to when that post-game is going to be provided each week. But typically, it's going to be right after the game, featuring Jason. We're also looking for some support for Jason, some backups, and for some people for him to collaborate with. But Jason will be anchoring our post-game coverage here at the Voice of College Football OU. So be looking forward to that, and I'll be blasting out plenty of reminders for that, so all of you can lock in with your comments, your questions. You can vent. If Oklahoma only wins by 52 points the first week, the world is crashing down around us. Or whatever the case might be, if they actually get challenged against somebody like a Nebraska in week 3, I doubt it, but it's possible. They've got guys on scholarship too. So there are going to be those games when the Sooners, with these incredible expectations, don't necessarily lose, but will not meet those expectations. It's just the matter of competition. The other guys have big talented guys too, who lift weights and watch film and try just as hard. So I think sometimes we hold these teams to such high standards because of the name and the colors that they wear, that they have to be perfect, that every game has to be a 5-touchdown win. And again, yes, the recruiting rankings will tell us, and the record from year to year will tell us that they are overwhelmingly the better team almost every time they step on the field. But the other programs know what they're doing too. They're well coached and have athletes, so they're trying to.
Oh,
and it means just as much to them.
Well, and I think when in that line of thinking, Mark, I'm with you. Absolutely agree. And I think the nature of Oklahoma fans, and it's not any different than any big blood, especially or blue blood, I should say, any specifically in the top 5 teams this year. But I think there's an expectation out there that whoever it is, specifically Oklahoma in this case, they go out and they dominate every single opponent, specifically based on what the schedule looks like. Is this on the outside looking in, it looks like maybe a little bit easier this year. And so when you kind of look at that, I think one of the big things in the off season, I think from a mentality perspective, we talked about Oklahoma losing to Kansas State the last 2 years. In that vein, you go to the SEC, you got to bring it every single week. There's not going to be any. There's no Kansas States out there really when you think about that. So, I think the mentality that Oklahoma brings, and it comes from the top down, from Lincoln Riley on down, having that killer instinct, I think is a big question mark into the season for me. If you look at that, they've allowed teams to stay around from time to time. You go to even the Kansas State this past year they were up 35-14, all the way to the Big 12 championship game. They had their foot on the neck of Iowa State and could have put them away, pretty easily early in that game, but they kind of took their foot off the gas. And and I think it's partly Lincoln Riley, and I think it's partly just the offense, and really him understanding how to play offense with a defense which is as talented as what they have. So I think that's another big storyline that we'll be following throughout the season on what does that look like.
So Jason, I got to say, you made a big comment there about there not being any Kansas States in the SEC.
Well, there's one.
So of course, Kansas State's all over the place, of course, to a certain extent. But when I think Kansas State, I'm thinking 7-5, 8-4. Of course, Bill Snyder did much better than that for a long period of time, but that's been a while. They're settling into that 7-5 kind of program, and even under Snyder the second time. So you don't think that Kansas State would be along the lines of what Tennessee's been recently, or Missouri, somebody like that, South Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And I think maybe, to your point, Mark, I should have phrased.
I understand your point. Yeah.
No, I think I probably should have phrased just a little bit differently in saying that if you don't bring that A game every single week, there's a team like Kansas State, and maybe there's not a team that you immediately think from a Big 12 perspective that that equates. But that point's well taken. But I think the overall point is that to make sure, which is a big part of what Oklahoma has been, they get up for the big games. If it's the Texas, the Iowa States, the the Oklahoma States of the world now. It's where maybe their attention's a little bit diverted and they're not completely up for a team like Kansas State, in which that will come back to bite them. And I think you almost look at when you look at predictions. We talked about that a little bit earlier. There's going to be a game this year where Oklahoma's not completely in it for whatever reason. The motivation is not as strong as it would be for some of the other games. And does Oklahoma have the ability, have the will? Does they have that championship medal to be able to get over, that and win those games where they're not at their best?
Absolutely. And I didn't want to nitpick there, but I just wanted to get your next level of thinking there on that statement. And I think more so to the last point you made, if you really look at the Big 12 recently, with Texas being down for now more than 10 years, except for possibly one season, and Iowa State elevating itself as clearly the second best team. I don't know about the second best program. I'm more of a program guy. I've got to see it for 3 or 4 years, and Matt Campbell's done an amazing job. But up until last year, it was 7-5, 8-4.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything crazy. I don't even think they finished in the top 25. Maybe they did one time, but they had some 7-5s there that didn't land them after like a bowl win, 8-5, or a bowl loss. I think they went 7-6 the year before. So anyway, my point being that next tier under Oklahoma the last 5 years or so in the conference has been razor thin. It's been like somebody's jumped up temporarily. Iowa State the last couple of years, or really the last year, season played. Texas in 2018 when they won the Sugar Bowl. TCU briefly. Going back to when Baylor and TCU were both good, 2014, obviously both came within a whisker of the playoffs, where since then, that layer under Oklahoma is very thin before you get into like a lot of 6-6, 7-5 teams that you can kind of group all together. Where in the SEC, if Alabama's having a year where they're quote unquote dominating, you still have, you've got a nice, thick layer of like 5-6 teams that are legitimate top 25 teams. And if they're not finishing in the top 25, it's pretty much because they lost to a bunch of really good teams, and they're actually one of the 25 best teams in the country. I think we could go to the SEC every year and point out teams that they just had a brutal schedule. Would we feel confident placing them in the top 25 if we just said, here are the top 25 best teams in the country, and they're going to go out and play the other 24 teams? I think, on a year, let's say Auburn goes 8-5 and doesn't finish in the top 25, most observers would think that they're still one of the 25 best teams in the country.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's why I kind of made the point of mentality, because I think Oklahoma's gotten away with that, with that mentality over the years, exactly to your point, Mark, because the talent disparity has been so great. Even you've got Iowa State, you've got Texas, you've got, Oklahoma State to a certain degree, but you've had these teams where Oklahoma has overwhelming talent advantage, so they've not necessarily had to bring their A game. There's not a game this year. I wouldn't say during the regular season where Oklahoma is going to be at a talent disadvantage on the field until they get to the playoffs. But when you look at an SEC schedule, whether it's next year or whenever that might be, there's probably going to be 2 or 3, I would say anywhere from probably 2 to 4 games each year where Oklahoma could be at a talent disadvantage based on how the schedule, works out. So I think that mentality, which is something that they need to start building towards this year, will help them in the coming years.
Yes, I cycle back through my thought. To be more specific, there basically has been one team in the Big 12 that kind of jumps up for that 1 year, gives Oklahoma a bit of a push. Like last year, obviously, it was Iowa State. They beat them in the regular season. They challenged them in the Big 12 championship game. Oklahoma still wins. Iowa State finishes 9-3, wins the Fiesta Bowl. Year before, 2019, Guess that would have been Baylor.
Mhm.
Baylor had a really good season, only had one loss. Had a big lead on Oklahoma. That was the year that they had the enormous lead, and Oklahoma came back. Yeah, Jalen Hurts at quarterback, came back and beat them. Baylor pushed them in the Big 12 championship game, but then Baylor drops back. One year it was Will Greer in West Virginia. Took him to that crazy, what was that, like 61-58 final that would have forced, was that before the Big 12 championship
It was.
game came back? Yeah, so that must have been 2016.
It was, yeah.
Because then TCU made it to the Big 12 championship game in 17 and really didn't challenge Oklahoma in either the regular season game or the Big 12 championship game, but they were the team that jumped up at number 2. Texas took their turn in 2018, and in some respects seemed to be the most capable of. It was a really good Big 12 championship game. Oklahoma just kind of took it over in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And of course, Texas won the regular season matchup and won the Sugar Bowl. So it's you're looking at 5 or 6 consecutive years where it's been a team just kind of jump up momentarily and challenge Oklahoma to two different extents. So for all of you that think Iowa State's going to be around forever, this might be their last go around, especially if they can't hang on to their coach.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Mark, those are ebbs and flows of some of these programs that are, I mean, you talked about Baylor. Baylor's has been really good, but they've kind of fallen off over the last couple of years. So, and then you look at TCU. They've been a team that has been, they made it to that Big 12 championship game, but they've been kind of, a little bit towards the middle of the pack over the last couple of years. And then, Oklahoma State's another team that's interesting. But I think when you look at the schedule for this season, this Oklahoma team, it's beneficial. I think the way that it works out, you've got Iowa State at home, you have TCU at home, you have West Virginia at home. So I think, in terms of the question here, who's going to give Oklahoma a challenge? I mean, Texas and Oklahoma State are the 2 games that are still going to be tough, especially this year with a little bit of the animosity that's going on behind the scenes between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State over the SEC thing. And I mean, I think by that time, it's the final game of the year. Let's see, November 27th. So I think by Thanksgiving we'll have an idea of when Oklahoma and Texas are playing in the SEC, especially if it's 2022. So that one, could bring even a little bit more meaning there. But I think if I had to circle one game on the schedule that could be, outside looking in terms of a team that you don't necessarily think that would challenge Oklahoma, specifically being at home, I think I look at the TCU game. They played TCU right after Texas. So Oklahoma they go to Kansas State on October 2nd, which, you would think that they have a lot of motivation going into that game. And then obviously Texas on the 9th, and then they go back and go home to play TCU on the 16th. You could see, where that could be a little bit of a letdown, situation for Oklahoma, specifically if they're able to win that game against Texas. So that's a game that, you kind of look at. Maybe West Virginia at home, at Baylor late in the year is another one. So it's hard to your point, Mark, it's so hard because it's been somebody different almost every year. So it's so hard to pinpoint that. But I think TCU's a team that I think is a little bit better than people, and we'll get into this. I'm sure we'll do some Big 12 predictions or national predictions here as we get closer to the season. But the TCU is a team that I think is a little bit better than that a lot of people give them credit for.
Yeah, without getting into details about TCU, just in watching Big 12 Media Days and doing a little bit of research during the offseason, Gary Patterson and others, offensive coordinator, have stated Max Duggan's improved considerably. I know that that's a typical statement to make about any player or a starting player, quarterback, during the offseason, but they seem to be authentic about that. And of course, he's had health issues, so it's good to see him back and ready to play. And TCU's just in regards to, as we rolled out the best defensive linemen and you had prepared the best linebackers in the conference, TCU stacks up with I don't want to say waves and waves of guys, but for a defensive front, they seem to have a number of guys who have already made plays or freakish kind of athletes. I think that they may return to their defensive form this year. And the other thing about the schedule, Jason, and I have no numbers to back this up, but I went through Athlons and maybe another magazine, and I've got my certain criticisms of these magazines for as good as they are, and they're exceptional. One would be, I'm going to take us down a different path real quick. One would be is they basically take last season's results, tweak them slightly, and roll them out as this year's results. So what I did was I looked at 3 consecutive off-season, preseason magazines between like Athlon, Street and Smith's, somebody else, maybe Lindy's. And I looked to see, now you can't, unfortunately, we can't really do it this year because of the COVID season and the inordinate amount of games that were played by everybody. Nobody played a 12-game schedule, so you can't match up, 9-3 versus 8-4. And so it kind of messes up my research here for this particular season. But the 3 previous seasons going into 19, 18, and 17, I looked at those preseason magazines to determine who are they pointing out that's going to upgrade considerably or downgrade considerably. And I held that as a 3-game measurement, meaning, and I just arbitrarily chose that. Somebody could choose something else, but I thought that was significant and reasonable, that if a team's 6-6 and they go 9-3 the next year, that's a significant improvement. Yep. Or if a 6-6 team goes 3-9 the next year, that's a significant. So I counted how many instances that those magazines were predicting that to happen for somebody in the Power 5, and it was typically like 3 or 4 teams out of 65. Okay. Then I went went through the standings to see how many times that actually happened. And I was surprised because I think of college football just being the same every year. Well, the top's the same, but the rest of it changes considerably. Between 18 and 23 teams, those 3 consecutive seasons either increased or decreased by 3 games in the standings. So that's like a quarter to a third of the Power 5 significantly changing from year to year.
Yeah, no, that is interesting to hear. I certainly I agree with you. I would have certainly expected the top ones to be the top, but I think it's interesting to see that those other teams that you mentioned, the ebb and flow within each and every year. I think it makes both of our points brilliantly here, that we that for Oklahoma on the schedule there seems to be someone else that's going to jump up and be there. Like for instance, I think Baylor is a team in the Big 12 this year that would probably meet that criteria that you had mentioned. I think they at least they get to 5 wins this year, maybe one more to get to a bowl game. So you mentioned Kansas State. They're perennially a 7-5, 8-4 type season, type team. But they were 5-7 last year. Do they go up a little bit? And yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting to look at for sure.
And the other part in that I was going to bring up as I looked at the schedule, and I thought it was interesting that you brought up a trap game for Oklahoma being against TCU at home, because another thing that I checked out in these magazines, and this is conventional thought, this is what most people do when they're looking for upsets, they go to road games. Mm-hmm. They typically go to road games, and that's conventional thought, and the winning percentage is higher at home for teams, but I think we overplay that. I think that there are a number of upsets that happen at home for these teams. Again, more likely to happen on the road, but I don't think it's just overwhelmingly always happens on the road. And that's another thing I've determined in looking at these magazines and looking at various prognostications online, that they're always pinpointing the losses to be on the road.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think two of Oklahoma's biggest losses over the last few years, came at home. Certainly last year against Kansas State, and a few years ago against Iowa State, when they weren't quite what they are now. So, and even in some of these other teams, years ago, Alabama lost to Texas A&M under, of course, that's years and years ago, but they lost that game at home. They lost to LSU at home. Not a huge upset, obviously, but when you look at some of these top teams,
they lost to Ole Miss at home.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. And then Clemson, years and years ago, lost to Pittsburgh, at home, and then almost last year, almost lost to Boston College at home. So yeah, I think some of these teams, when you look at it, you kind of go under the assumption that they let their guard down a little bit more when they're at home, and maybe think the crowd can will them to a win more so than on the road. So yeah, that definitely happens more than you would think.
All right, folks, it's been great to have everyone here for another edition of Oklahoma Sooners Live right here at the Voice of College Football. And again, this only happens because of this guy, Jason Ray. Catch him at Last Word on College Football as they prepare you for the season. And another reminder that we will provide Oklahoma post-game right here throughout the season. Jason, any parting words? Maybe we'll have a little bit of tidbits out of camp here next week.
Yeah, I'm hoping to have a little bit more depth and meat from a fall camp perspective when we talk next week. There's a couple of, I think Oklahoma will have probably 2 or 3 more commitments, for the 2022, maybe even, or the 2023 class, maybe some for next year's class that we can talk to a little bit. Lincoln Riley always puts on Twitter the eyeballs out to signify that Oklahoma's got a recruit that's on the verge of committing, and there was 3 of them that he had put out last night. So I know that I haven't seen exactly if anyone has committed, other than I see the comment here about Luke Haas from, which is a big get for Oklahoma, just down the road here, from where I live in Bixby, Oklahoma. So I think he's a big one to look at. So yeah, there might be some things that we can look at next year, or next week, I should say, from a recruiting perspective, as well as what's going on in the fall camp. And certainly we'll get into some predictions, Big 12, national and things like that, as well as we move forward through the next few weeks.
Yeah, so it's not become official in regards to anything posted on 247 or otherwise, but you're talking about the number 2 rated tight end in the country, top 50 prospect, number 1 in Oklahoma, according to 247 Sports, right there. All right, good stuff. There were a couple of questions that came in late as well that Jason had addressed earlier, so just wait for the video to post. It will here in about 15 to 20 minutes, and check back and watch the remainder of the show, as we typically have more people online at the end of the show. So appreciate everybody being here. We will see you again next Friday, but keep those notifications on in case there has to be a scheduling change. All right, Jason, have a great weekend.
All right, thanks, you too, Mark.